They closed the doors, so I guess I could take that as a cue to get started. Thought there might be a board member or somebody here to make this all official. All right, well, my name's Cole Davison. This next session is obviously taking quantum beyond the desktop, and really what I'm interested in talking about today is some technologies, some approaches, and some examples of ways that we and quantum users, we at Component Control and quantum users, are making processes that allow their users to be untethered from the desktop computer running quantum, having access to the functionality they need when and where they need it without necessarily having to always be at their desk to be able to do useful work in quantum. So if that's not what you're here to listen to, you still have time to run. Nope, that's not the right one. So, as I say, I'm Cole Davison. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Component Control. A lot of you have heard me speak before and know me. These days, my primary area of responsibility has to do with projects at Component Control and systems that we're putting together or have put together that deal with some of the web and other non-traditional technologies, right? The quantum system, the client-server system, is mostly handled by the development team under Carlo Del Frate. The web stuff, and as we'll talk about, some of the mobile stuff is being dealt with by my team and is my primary responsibility. So these include things like the StockMarket.Arrow system, our electronic data interchange messaging system we call EDI, the Quantum Portal project, which I think a lot of you are probably familiar with by now, and as I say, some new directions in development that we've started with in the last year or so, having to do with development for mobile devices and web-based functionality to support that effort, and we'll talk a little bit more about that over the course of this talk. So, as I say in this session, what I really want to talk about is sort of highlighting some functionality and some technologies that we have in place and that we have at our fingertips to be able to allow users to get away from their desks and their desktop workstations and still be able to work directly against the quantum system. So eliminating the need for writing everything down on a piece of paper so that you get back to your desk and put it into quantum, that sort of activity that has always been the way people needed to do things. Also want to talk a little bit about functionality and technologies that we have that allow you to provide access to quantum-based functionality to remote users, whether those users are your users who are not in your facility, or whether those users are your customers or your vendors. The kinds of things that I'm going to cover during this talk, and really what I want to do is talk a little bit about the technologies and some of the approaches that are being used and then give some examples. I'm hoping it doesn't come off as just sort of a laundry list of features. I'm hoping that I'll be able to put it into a context that makes it clear why the approach that I'm showing you is potentially, a benefit to the business processes that you're going through every day. So there's a couple of different sort of what I've called models for how we've implemented this sort of functionality to get people away from their desk. And the first one I'm going to talk about I call the kiosk model. The most common example, and a lot of this stuff was touched on briefly by Todd and Nick in the last session, and hopefully I'll be able to give you a little more sort of colorful version of the kinds of things that they touched very briefly on. We commonly see people implement kiosk type functionality using applications like the generic BC application that Nick was talking about in the last session. Using generic BC and a few other sort of similar analogous applications like the TA barcode entry application is another one that I'll give you a quick example of. It allows you to centralize access to specific quantum functionality in a physical location that makes sense for it to be there, right? Rather than having to do everything by going back to your desk and logging into Quantum and navigating through the modules to find what you need. There's a computer that's been set up as a kiosk just steps away from where you're doing the work that you need to record in Quantum, and it eliminates the need to walk any further. Later in the talk, I'm actually going to discuss sort of a case study that the whole project started out with some interns being brought in to do a motion study where they followed around mechanics in a hangar with stopwatches and collected the time they took doing every little thing they were doing and found out just how much time every day is spent walking from place to place. And I think you'll see that it makes a really interesting story in terms of what the problem is that we're trying to solve and some of the approaches for how it was solved or is being solved. The next model that I'm going to talk about is what I'm calling the mobile model, and that's using purpose-built native mobile applications, in many cases native mobile applications, on a mobile device that your user may already have in his possession, maybe a phone, maybe it's a tablet, whatever, but giving them direct access to quantum functionality from this mobile device and untethering them from the need to be in front of any computer, not a kiosk, not their desktop. They're just freely mobile around the facility, but still able to do work directly against quantum. And then the last model that I'll talk about briefly is going to be sort of completely outside of your facility, giving remote users the ability to access specific quantum functionality from within a web browser environment over the internet. So we'll start talking and I want to give a number of examples. These are things that maybe Nick mentioned by name in the last one. I want to talk a little bit about what exactly the functionality is. I'm going to try and, as I say, not to make this just a laundry list of features discussion, but there are quite a few examples, and my hope is that as I'm showing you the solutions that have been put in place and explaining why we thought this was a useful way to do it and how people are doing it, not only might you see something that you're not doing but could be doing that directly applies to your processes, but you might also find things we haven't done yet, and this clues you into how we might be able to use some of these approaches to solve problems or make processes easier that you have in place that we haven't even thought of yet. So the kiosk model, and this is a point that I'm going to make over and over again. I think the key to this is giving the user access to just the functionality he needs, where he needs it, and not making him navigate through any functionality he doesn't need at this point in your business process. Now, there are a number of examples here, some of which are in generic BC, some of which are in other applications, and I just want to go through, and part of this will be telling you what the functionality is and why we think it's useful, and some of it is also going to be you may already be using generic BC, you may already know about some of the things it does, but there's been some new development, and I want to give you a little more information about some of the new bells and whistles. So probably the first application of this kiosk model for relieving people from needing to be at their computer, the first application that we did was for labor recording on the workshop floor or on the hangar floor. And I hope you can see that. It looks funky from this angle, but hopefully it's clear enough. This is actually a screenshot of our current version of our generic BC application. And for those of you who aren't familiar with how this is used for labor recording, the mechanic, in most cases it's a mechanic doing the labor recording in the shop or on the hangar floor, he comes in, he identifies himself. Maybe he identifies himself by scanning a barcode on his badge, and the kiosk computer has a generic barcode reader. That's why they call it generic BC, legacy name. So once the system identifies who the user is, this application is connected directly to the Quantum database. So all of the details of your business are available for us to work with from this application. So immediately we know who the user is, things like what skills do they have assigned to them, things like what job cards are they already clocked into and should they already be working on, what job cards are available to them to begin work on. We can immediately search through the database and collect all of that relevant information, focusing specifically on what he needs and nothing else, because we know who he is. We don't need to show him job cards that aren't appropriate for him to work on, for example. So what we're actually seeing here is, hopefully you can see there are some, these are job cards that are available to be worked on. So the user has logged in. We actually know that he's currently working on these, so that he's got an open batch of job cards that he's clocked into. Here's a set of job cards that he is not yet clocked into, but could presumably start work on. You'll see that some of them are in blue and some of them are in black. This is some new development. The blue ones are automatically pulling recently worked on job cards with the assumption that if he worked on it at some point over the last week, then it may be something that's still ongoing, and it's likely that that it makes up a short list of things that this mechanic is possibly going to work on next. Again, this is a recurring theme that I think that I hope I'll make clear over the course of the talk. There can be an overwhelming amount of data in Quantum, and making it as easy as possible for them to find the information they need and specify what they're doing with as little searching, with as little stopping in the process as possible, is what's going to make these kinds of processes really efficient, really valuable. So we're trying to predict which job cards, of the hundreds of available job cards, which ones should we show him first because they're most likely to be selected. So this is some new development where it's gonna proactively figure out what he's worked on recently and ask if those are something that he might need next. Once he finds a job card that he wants to work on, he can select it on this grid, hit this button, and it'll move it over to the list of job cards in the batch to be worked on. Once he hits the submit button down here, in the background, instantaneously, it will clock him on to a labor batch. If you've got things set up for batch labor recording, if you've got things set up to not allow batch labor recording, it stops you from adding more than one job card to the list, right? So you can only work on one at a time. But that's, again, that's implementing your business practice and validating the behavior of the user. The other thing to note about this is up here there's a little checkbox called touch mode. So this is being used very extensively in the kiosk model with a computer that has a touch screen. So yes, the application is called generic BC, and most of our users are using it with barcoding, but we're finding more and more companies are interested in getting rid of the paper, getting rid of the process of scanning barcodes, and using a touch screen really streamlines the process of doing this kind of data entry. I mentioned before that another one of these kiosk type applications that we distribute is it's called TA barcode entry, and those companies that are using our time and attendance module may already be entirely familiar with this, but I think this is a really obvious example of where having a kiosk for a very specific bit of functionality makes obvious sense. You can clock in to work for the day in our time and attendance module by sitting down at your desk, logging into Quantum, opening up the time and attendance module, finding the clock in entry off of the menu. But what makes more sense is when you walk in the door, there's a time clock there, right? I mean, that's the way it's worked for the last 150 years. Well, this is a digital implementation connected directly to the time and attendance system. In many cases, the employee has a badge with a barcode that identifies him. In other cases, there's a directory taped up on the wall next to the time and attendance kiosk. They scan their name, and it immediately gives them a list of what is the operation you're doing. Are you clocking in for the day? Are you clocking out for the day? Clocking in for lunch, right? In from lunch. And it's giving them all of the information that they need to be able to manage their current time clock entry and nothing more. They don't have to go find this by navigating through any other information. So I think that it's a pretty clear example of this kiosk model for streamlining a process, but still working directly in Quantum with the Quantum functionality. Some other things that folks are doing in the last year with the kiosk type functionality, tool check-in and check-out. This is the idea that you've got a tool crib with all of the tooling in it, and rather than having to go to Quantum, check out a tool against a task in a work order, a job card, then go to the tool crib and check out that and remove that tool from the rack, you put a kiosk next to the tool crib, and it's got a barcode scanner. They pick the tool off the wall, they scan the barcode on the tool, they scan the barcode on their badge, and the system now, because it's connected directly to Quantum, it's able to, you scan the barcode on the tool, we know exactly what it is, what the serial number is, we can keep track of exactly which tool you're using for all of the tracking information. It knows who you are. It can be configured so that checkout and check-in of tools needs a supervisor's approval. And then if it's configured for that, then a supervisor would have to come and scan as a step in the process. And you've got the traveler for your work order, or you've got the work pack, and you can scan the barcode on that. So now it knows everything it needs to know to be able to check out the tool for a specific user against a specific task and track all of that information. It also just, for convenience, it's also showing anything that's currently checked out by the current user. I guess that's this. And it gives you a running tally of tool check-in, check-out history by that user. So again, an example of putting just the functionality they need for tool checkout right at the tool crib and not making them go, take any more steps than they need to do a focused task in Quantum. This is, I believe, some new functionality this year. The ability in the generic BC application to manage the statuses of work order tasks. And what this really is an implementation of a business process management functionality, right? Pushing a task on a job card or on a work order through its life cycle from inception to completion, without having to go back to Quantum every time you want to move it to the next step in its life cycle. So it should be, you know, fairly familiar by this time, but the notion is that you know, the user scans his badge. Now we know who he is. He scans the traveler. Now we know what work order he's working on, and then he can. It actually supports a couple of different modes of use, but there's a drop-down list, and this is a list of all of the available task statuses or work order statuses that he could push this task into or push this work order into a new status. By the same token, we have folks who are printing out a directory of tasks with barcodes, posting it next to the kiosk, and my process is, you know, when I complete this step of the life cycle of the work order, I step to the kiosk, I scan the work order traveler, I scan my badge, and I scan the status that I'm moving it to off of the wall, and it pushes the work order to its next life cycle phase. And a lot of things can happen from there. I mean, obviously, you folks all of you who are doing repair and maintenance know how the system can be used to help move the work through its life cycle by using statuses in the system. Later, when we're talking about mobile and web-based functionality, I'm going to talk a little more about the business process management and sort of a case study example that I think makes for an illustrative story of how this can all be put together to solve some pretty complex business processes. We can now issue stock and sort of manage stock on a number of different levels from within a kiosk next to the plane or a kiosk on the shop floor. You identify yourself, you identify the work order that you're working on in this case, and the task, and then this functionality allows you to do things like create a bill of material entry on the fly without having to go back to the work order system in Quantum. It allows you to create a stock reservation against an existing bill of material entry on the fly without having to go do any additional work. It can all be done in a matter of a few barcode scans. And this is actually something that is brand new, and I think it makes a good story because it shows how we can continue to streamline the process that we're trying to make simpler by using this kiosk method, by bringing in additional technology as it becomes more and more available. This is a kiosk mode of being able to manage sign-off of work order or work package tasks. And what's particularly nifty about this is that if the computer that's running the kiosk has an RFID reader, then this can be enabled so that the mechanic who needs to sign off the work he just did walks up to the machine, and as he walks up to it, it recognizes who he is. And that's not only an example of minimizing data entry and not making him scan another barcode or whatever, but it's also potentially a security enhancement, right? It's that much more difficult for someone to accidentally sign off work that they didn't perform because you're only able to sign off as you walk up. It recognizes who you are. Now it limits your ability to designate a task for sign off to only those things that we know you're working on, right? So it has a significant security aspect to it, as well as just streamlining data entry and minimizing data entry errors. So the other thing that this does is it implements a multiple level sign off. So if you've got mechanics who sign off the work that they did, and then a secondary sign off from an inspector or from a supervisor, you know, however that works in your part of the industry, this system allows multiple levels of sign off and it can even validate things like if you were the one who signed off the first sign off, it won't allow you to be the one who signs off the second, right? So it can implement validation for business processes, both for the purposes of minimizing mistakes, but also for the purposes of implementing security protocols. And this is actually, if you're not doing RFID, it also has the capacity to be put into a touchscreen mode where the buttons get bigger, and so mechanics with big fingers don't miss, that kind of thing. So it can be sort of tailored to whatever the work mode is that best suits your environment. So just to sort of recap the salient features about this kiosk approach to liberating a user from having to sit at a desktop running Quantum, the kiosk mode runs on a desktop PC, right? But it's a dedicated desktop PC. It might be in a fixed place, like the time clock example, sitting right inside the front door. It might be on a mobile cart that gets moved from bay to bay in the hangar as planes come in and leave. We can implement functionality like labor recording, tool check-in, check-out, time and attendance, etc. It can be made to take advantage of things like barcoding for streamlining data entry, things like touch screens. RFID is becoming more and more interesting to people. So that abruptly ends my talk about the kiosk mode. The next sort of approach to liberating your users from their desktop is going to bring in some of the examples of mobile applications that we've been building over the last year. And I'm particularly excited about this stuff because it's fun to do. I know that doesn't have a whole lot of value for you guys, but for us, for Eldar and myself, that's actually a pretty big deal. The idea is that on a completely untethered mobile device, whether that's a phone, whether that's a tablet, on your network or off of your network, maybe only connected to the cellular network, right? As long as it's got connectivity, we can find a way back to the quantum system. In this case, it's indirectly back to the quantum system, so it's actually this mobile application isn't connecting directly to your Oracle server. It's connecting to a set of web services that are running on a server at your facility, and those web services can be configured to be accessed from inside your network. They can be configured to be accessed on the public internet, which really extends the reach of quantum beyond just having to plug into an Ethernet port. It places, the way we've been doing this, we're placing very specific suites of quantum-specific functionality into the hands of the users on a mobile device, and as I said, literally into their hands, because they're able to pick it up and walk around with it, enter data while they're laying on their back inside I don't know what the term is, the bulkhead of the aircraft or whatever, right? Without having to even go find a computer. They've got it right there in their hands. The tools that we're using for the application, for the mobile app development, we're actually building native applications, native iOS applications, native Android applications, and native Windows tablet applications, Windows mobile applications. So in the case of what I'm going to be describing here, we're not talking about building a web page that you're then accessing on your phone. We're talking about building native applications, and there are some reasons why that turns out to be powerful. So this is going to be sort of a case study of how we've used some of these new technologies to solve a particularly complex business process flow. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, we had one of our customers come to us with a request for helping them come up with a way to minimize how much time a mechanic is spending walking around from place to place while he's supposed to be working on an aircraft, right? I mean, it's a critical thing. It's not like he's goofing off. It's just that if he's got to go record what he did in quantum labor recording, he's got to walk away from the plane to do it. If he's got to go record a new non-routine maintenance event that he's just discovered, he's got to walk away from the plane to do it. And in some hangars, that can be a long way to walk away from the plane, right? So you could, in this case, and I'm not sure I have the numbers correct, but they had a couple of interns come in and follow the mechanics around, and they found really remarkable amounts of time were being spent moving from place to place rather than turning wrenches. And I don't remember the numbers, but 70% sticks in my mind as, at least in some cases, up to 70% of the time might have been not turning a wrench, but moving from place to place to perform the tasks that were required. So this was the first example of a mobile application to try to solve some of those problems. And these are screenshots from the working app. I'm not going to try to demo it live while I'm standing up in front of all of you, but it is running all next door in the at our booth. So if this piques anybody's interest, we can certainly do live demonstrations and show you how it looks, how it feels, running over the internet back to web services, running in at Component Control down the street. But the user experience is something like this. They come into work, they pick up their tablet, they walk out to the plane, they start up the app, and it asks them to log in. And in this case, they're logging in as their Quantum user, because we're going to be connecting directly to Quantum and doing Quantum functionality. We're going to be able to log all of their activity just as though they were logged into Quantum, right? So they're logging in with their Quantum credentials, and they're presented with a screen like this that shows them in the top section. These are job cards that I'm currently clocked into. These are job cards that are available for me to work. This should look kind of familiar. It's certainly based on the functionality that we have in the generic BC application. You'll also notice that we know who the user is who's logged in. There's also a drop-down box here. We know what all the skills are that user has assigned to them, and as they're clocking labor against job cards, against tasks on a work order or work package, they can designate which skill it is that they want to be clocking labor against, right? As I said before, again, we're faced with the possibility that there are a whole lot of possible job cards for them to clock into, and how do we make it as easy as possible for them to find the ones they need without having an overwhelming list to look through. So there's actually this little button off to the side here invokes a filtering pane, and you can do things like include in the list recent tasks that I've recently worked on because I'm likely to need to clock into them again. You can do things like filter out all the tasks that I've worked on for the last however many days, or filter out the last 20 tasks that I worked on and put those on the list. And this can be tailored to whatever your actual work patterns are in your organization to try to make it as easy as possible for them to find what they need. These are drop-downs that are populated directly from the lookup tables in Quantum. So as this panel is being displayed on the mobile device, there's a series of web service calls that are going back over the network, whether that's the local network or the internet, and grabbing the list of all work packages and the list of all statuses and aircraft and hangar bays, so that he can then pick from a list rather than having to type in and potentially mistype things and make it any more difficult to find what he needs. Another thing to note, though, is the list of statuses in your work package system. You might have 500 statuses defined in your work order status table, and only 5 of those are really ever statuses that a mechanic on the shop floor or a mechanic on the hangar floor needs to worry about. So we've actually built a flagging system on all of these lookups so that you as the administrator can filter out in that lookup of available statuses, only show this set of statuses that are flagged as visible on the mobile app. So again, trying to filter out everything he doesn't need to see and show him only the things he does need to see. So once you invoke that search, it comes back, it gives you the search results. The behavior of this system is very similar to what we saw in generic BC. He can touch any row, highlight it. You can hit an arrow over here that moves it up into the upper pane. When it's in the upper pane and he's set up whatever the batch is that he's interested in working on now, he hits the submit button and it instantly clocks him into a batch containing only these job cards. Talked to a customer yesterday at Open House who was saying, well, we've already got some things that we built in-house for doing this kind of labor recording off of a mobile phone. The difference is that we can't really clock in and out of things the way I've described. We can designate on the phone that this is the one I'm going to work on, and then only at clock out time are we able to write back to the database. So we've got these data entries that are really odd because it looks like you clocked in and clocked out at clock out time. Well, that kind of problem isn't a problem with this because we're interacting directly with the quantum database. It's not a matter of writing data to something outside of quantum and then figuring out how to sync it back into quantum later. I don't remember what my next slide is. Oh, okay. So there's an example of how this user interface on a mobile device could be used for labor recording, clocking in and out of job cards. The next step was, well, while we're working on a job card, there are some things that would be really convenient to have at your fingertips, right? One of the processes that they wanted to be able to manage here was the creation of new job card data in quantum based on having found a non-routine maintenance event. So if I'm logged in, if I'm clocked into a job card, and I have the security set up appropriate for being allowed to do this, right? If my administrator's given me the rights to create non-routine job cards, then I can hit this create non-routine job card button, and it brings up a form here where we already know the work package that we're working on. We know the originating job card because that's what I was clocked into. And then it gives me the ability to build out the skeleton of information about this new non-routine event that I found, including things like ATA positions. And we built a new table of keywords. So you can set up whatever keywords you think are useful. You know, put corrosion as a keyword, and then every time a mechanic finds corrosion, he can set that keyword, and later in reporting you'll be able to find how many times are we seeing corrosion over the course of a year, that kind of thing. So that was sort of a nod to the ability to report on it later. The original mechanic can do things like designate a skill that he expects will be needed and estimate hours for that skill, tie it to a reference to a specific publication that might be applicable, and then obviously put in some discrepancy information. Now, here's where the story about business process management comes into play. When he hits the submit button, it's going to create a new non-routine job card in the work package linked to the originating job card, just like if you had done it in Quantum. And it's going to set the status of that job card to a status that the administrator has set up that means this is a non-routine job card that has not yet been reviewed. And in the case of this, this customer that we built this with, they then, in the area of their hangar where the shift supervisor sits, they have a big screen TV, and we've got a dashboard on there. And every time a new non-routine job card with the status of needs to be reviewed comes into the system, it pops up on the big screen, and the shift supervisor recognizes that he has a job to do to go look at the plane and review it and maybe fill out some additional information about it. So now I'm the shift supervisor. I've taken my tablet, I walk back out to the plane, I log in. The system knows that I have the security rights to review non-routine job cards. So I clock into that new non-routine job card, and I can hit this review non-routine job card button. It brings up a similar form that has, you know, multiple skills, multiple hours estimates, a lot of additional information that that probably needs to be entered into the system before you could, for example, send out a quote to the customer for approval of this new work. And when he hits the button at the bottom of the review non-routine job card screen, it updates the job card immediately, and it sets it to a status. That job card is now set to a status that has been defined as this now needs to be quoted to the customer, right? So in the sales department or whoever's doing the quoting in your organization, they can have a big screen that's showing only those job cards that are in needs to be quoted status. Alternatively, you could have an event manager script that every 20 minutes is checking to see if there are any new job cards in the needs to be quoted status, and if there are, pushing an email notification to the sales guys saying, here's a job card that needs to be quoted, or whoever's responsible for quoting. I don't know if it's the sales guy or not. So we're using the functionality here to actually push the process through the different phases of its life cycle. In addition to the user being able to review the job card, when you're clocked into the job card, you can also hit this Add Image button. Well, that's the one. And it brings up a screen that actually captures input from the camera device or devices on the mobile device that you're working on. Now, I was saying earlier, we're making native mobile apps rather than web content that you're looking at in a browser. One of the reasons why I think that's particularly powerful is it's much more difficult to get access to the camera hardware on a tablet from within a browser than it is from within a native mobile app. So we're building them natively, and we don't have any trouble with accessing the hardware directly on the tablet. So in this case, and again, you can see this live next door, but the shift supervisor who's reviewing the job card can be taking pictures of the corrosion directly with the tablet. When you hit upload, it actually uploads to document imaging tied directly to that, back to that job card, so that everything is documented and everything is automatically linked together without having to go through any additional steps. Sort of the flip side of that is, while I'm working on a job card, whether it's this new non-routine or whether it's one of the routine job cards, I also have access from the tablet to anything that's already in document imaging that's linked to that job card. So if I'm clocked into it and I click View Image, I get a pane that gives me a list of all the entries to to document imaging that are linked to that job card. And in the case of this application, if they're photos or scans, seriously, 5 minutes? Wow. If they're photos or scans, it'll be rendered directly in the app. If it's a CAD file or a PDF file or something like that, the application will ask Windows for what the appropriate handler app is, and it'll pop open the PDF reader to show you the content from that file. And the plan is to use this to link PDFs of maintenance manuals and things like that so that the mechanic has the maintenance manual at his fingertips on the tablet while he's laying on his back under the plane. So the last sort of model, and I'm going to have to sort of scream through this, but the last model is getting access to quantum-centric functionality outside of your enterprise in the hands of your customers or your vendors or your own representatives who are outside of your building, outside of your facilities. By using a web browser-based system, obviously it's available on the internet outside of your enterprise. It gives you the ability to publish functionality out to remote users or customers or vendors. And the platform that we're most often using to build this kind of functionality is the Quantum Portal system. And that's another one of my babies, so I have to talk about that. But I think I have an example to sort of describe that I think sort of closes the loop on what we were just describing with the mobile app functionality. And that is, well, when your customer or any user logs into the Quantum Portal, by default they'll be dropped on a screen that sort of summarizes their relationship with you. It tells how many open quotes they have and order history and that sort of thing. That's just sort of out-of-the-box functionality. And if you haven't gone through with one of us what the available functionality is out of the box on the portal, please come by the booth and we'd be happy to show you what you get. But it's also a platform for us to build new functionality based on specific requirements. So if you imagine that scenario that I was describing before, where the mechanic is working on the job card, he finds corrosion, he creates a non-routine job card on the tablet. The supervisor sees it on the big screen and he goes out and reviews it, maybe takes some photos, attaches them in document imaging. It completes the review and it gets pushed to a status that means this is ready to be quoted. Now somebody in your quoting department, whichever department that is, goes through, sees the estimates based on what the review process gave them, builds a quote in the work order quote system in Quantum, and then there's an event manager script that's running every few minutes looking to see whether there are any new quotes with specific characteristics that have come into the system. And when it finds them, it builds an email notification to the customer that says, you have new work that you need to approve or your plane's not going to be done on time. And it includes in that email a link back to your Quantum Portal. So they follow that link. It takes them back to a new portal module wherein they can see all of the open work order or work package quotes. They can drill into the individual tasks, see the specific details of what is what's entailed in the quote, and they can click to approve it or click to decline it, but what we're calling it is request more information, because they can't really decline it if they want their airplane back. And all this is really doing is changing the status on the work order task again, right? It's another mechanism for pushing that work order task through its life cycle. So now they hit approve the work. It sets the status of that work order task to a status that means needs to be scheduled for work. Now you've got an event manager script notifying your production control people or a big screen dashboard in the production control office, and they see that there's a newly approved job card. They can drill into Quantum. Maybe you're using hangar management. They can assign it directly to a user. Now when that user logs into their tablet, it's going to pop up on the list of available to work, right? If the user declines the quote, then we can have an event manager script that recognizes every new task that comes in that is now in a status of declined by customer, and that pushes an email notification to your salesperson to call the customer and find out what their problem is with it and try to alleviate that problem. We could even do things like recognize when an email was sent, whether it's been like when a notification that there's new work that needs to be approved was sent out, whether it's been approved or not, and go through a process of dunning letters saying 24 hours ago we told you that you had unapproved work, you really need to look at it. 48 hours ago we told you and you still haven't looked at it. 72 hours ago, if you don't do something, we're not going to be able to meet our original estimated delivery date. All of that can be automated, and we can automate the business process through the entire life cycle of that work. I had just put in a couple of more slides of other things that you can push out to your customer, but I'm being told that time's up. If anything that I've talked about sort of piques your interest or makes you wonder whether you couldn't use some of these techniques to solve problems that you've got, please come and talk to us at the booth. If anybody wants to see demos of what I've shown, it's all available there as well. Yeah, thank you. I don't know if we have time for any questions here, but I'll head out towards the back of the room, and if anybody does have questions, please don't hesitate to ask.
Good job, Cole.